Chris Barger at GM is doing some of the most exciting work today in social media, both for internal communications and PR. In this interview today, Chris talks about GM's use of a wiki to write the history, the 100-year history of General Motors.
Well, General Motors is turning 100 years old in 2008, September 16th, actually. And as with any company that's reached that milestone, we were being approached by a lot of outside authors who wanted to write the definitive history of General Motors, come up with that coffee table book that a few of our executives could, proudly show off. And we thought, that's a nice idea and everything, but they're only going to get the piece of the story that comes from the folks that they have access to. If you're, maybe the company historian or a couple of the former CEOs or former executives, the person who developed the Camaro, whatever it is. But there's an entire other piece of our company's history, a rounder piece of it, that can only be told by the people who made the history and who built our company into what we are. So instead of commissioning this book, let's have the people who made the history tell the history. Go out to the guy who was on the line in the Lordstown, Ohio plant for 30 years and have him talk about this is what it was like to be an employee of General Motors. This is what my experience with the company is. Go out to the person who was on the test track when the very first Camaros were being tested in '67. Say, okay, I didn't design this car, but I was one of the guys who drove this sucker, and let me tell you what that was like. Or even, somebody who was working in Flint, Michigan in the 80s, and as the industry changed around us, we had to close plants and somebody who lost their job. It's less happy, but that's still part of our history. That's still something that needs to be told, and you're not necessarily going to get that in a coffee table book.
Barger explains how the wiki got off the ground and the kinds of stories they're looking for.
You set up the physical house for the place first, and then invited everybody over to the party. You try to seed it not with, not in the, seed the story kind of sense, but populate it a little bit first so that people sort of understand, okay, this is what I'm looking for. I don't necessarily want the formal, perfectly written I just want, in your own words and in your own heart, what your experience has been. Once you've given them that guide and shown them what you're looking for, then you start to see the stories roll in. And we also wanted to open it up to not just General Motors employees. Frankly, a journalist who covered the Chevelle or the Chevette in the early 70s, or the Vega or the Nova, if you were there when we launched the car, or if you were one of the guys who was writing the stories when the Vega wasn't doing so well, you have a perspective on the story too. So it's not just the GM people in the story, it's whoever experienced part of it. Build the story that way and then let it keep going.
The wiki contains more stories and history about GM than any traditional book could hold.
We have had more than 72,000 individual either entries or commentaries on entries that have been left. These are, again, from retirees, from current employees, from families of people who, my grandfather worked at the company and this is what I remember, or, even something as small as, my dad's first car was a Buick. I remember being in the back of the Buick and going for ice cream or, whatever. That's also part of the story. So, we've had any number of those things. Now, when you compare the success of that, 72,000 interactive people who are choosing to come in versus how many copies of a traditional book we would have sold, this blows it away.
The wiki will continue, but the history of GM just may end up on your coffee table.
We haven't decided. We have talked about it, and I think I would like to see it just because you recognize traditional audiences still want what they traditionally want. I think the limitation there is that, frankly, whenever you decide to make the cutoff, that's where that's where the story ends, and hopefully the story never ends. Hopefully people keep adding to it, and even as the next couple, the things that we're going through right now, if that wiki's still alive in 2010, man, this is going to be interesting stuff to have lived through and worked through.